Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to iExperts for hosting this session. My name is Taher Amine ELHOUARI, and I currently serve as head of advisory and CSIRT at Unity. And today, I want to challenge one assumption that I still see in so many organizations. So, the assumption that being compliant means being ready as our principal team for this session. Compliance is important, like everyone knows. It gives structure, accountability, documentation, control, discipline, and also assurance. But compliance alone does not really guarantee that an organization can perform under pressure. And a certificate as well does not stop an attacker, as you all know. So a policy does not contain ransomware, and a risk register does not restore a critical system or a critical asset at 2 a.m. So during this session, we will talk about what happens after the document exists, after the audit is passed, and after the framework is implemented. So we will look at how to transform compliance into some real operational capability. The key question for today is very simple. Can your organization anticipate, withstand, respond to, and recover, most importantly, from cyber incidents while keeping its critical services running? So overall, we will have around 30 minutes of presentation and 15 minutes dedicated as a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to keep your questions ready, especially if you want to discuss governance, SOC, CSIRT, incident response, ISO standards, business continuity, or other practical maturity models. So before going deeper, let me quickly and appropriately introduce my background so you understand the angle of this session. I serve currently as the internal CISO and also as head of advisory and CSIRT, like I mentioned, at Unity, where I lead both teams and activities. That means I operate at the intersection of strategy and operations. On one side, I work with governance, risk management, compliance, standards, certification readiness, and so on. And the other side, I deal with operational aspects of our field, or what we call SecOps as a whole, whether it's SOC, CSIRT, incident response, and so on. And this is important because many cyber discussions are usually separated into two worlds. And the first world is the audit room, where it contains policies, procedures, controls, evidence, risk assessments, and certifications as well. The second role is the incident room, where alerts, escalation, containment, decision making under pressure happen on a day-to-day operation. So my objective today is to connect these two worlds all together as a whole unified security posture. So I'm approaching this topic as a practitioner, as an auditor, as a trainer, and also as an advisor. I do not want to talk about compliance as theory, and I do not want to talk about resilience as a slogan like we usually see. So I want to show how organizations can turn structured frameworks and standards, such as ISO 27001, 535, also the ISO 22001, the NIST CSF, and so on, into real capabilities that perform when the organization is under stress. So the message is not that compliance is useless, but the message is that compliance must become operational inside an organization. So why this session? There are three reasons why this subject matters now. First, and most importantly, incidents are no longer exceptional events. They are part of the normal operating reality of organizations. Even strong ones with good tools, competent teams, and mature governance can be targeted. Prevention matters, but prevention has a certain failure rate. So a mature organization does not ask only how do we prevent everything, it also asks what happens when prevention fails. Second thing is that paper is not readiness. Many organizations have excellent documentation and documented information. They do have policies, risk registers, ERPs, BCPs, audit reports, and so on. But when a real incident happens, the question is not whether the document exists. The question is whether people know what to do, who decides, how fast they act, and whether critical services can be recovered. Third thing is resilience, because resilience is the real test. Customers, regulators, executives, and partners do not judge the organization only by the existence of conflicts. They judge whether the organization can continue, can respond, can recover, can communicate, and learn from its own mistakes. So the purpose of this session is to provide somehow a practical model for transforming governance, risk and compliance, and also SecOps into one connected resilience capability. So our talk is structured around, let's say, 6 parts. First thing, we will start with the compliance trap and why organizations can be compliant but still fail during incidents. Second thing, we will define cyber resilience in real practical terms, not just as a buzzword. Third thing, we will look at governance and risk because resilience begins with accountability and especially decision rights. And fourth thing, we will discuss how to turn frameworks into capability. Standards, as we all know, they are very useful, but only when operationalized. Fifth thing, we will move into operational resilience, like SOC, CSIRT, incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, and also crisis management. And then finally, we will close with maturity, metrics, and a practical roadmap, including quick wins that organizations can start applying immediately. At the very end of the session, once we continue our 36 slides, you will find 4 dedicated slides once we finish our webinar, where I'm going to try to share this presentation as a PDF as soon as possible in my page, and also hopefully with our colleagues at the iExperts company, where you will find certain extra documents and mappings that are pre-ready to be operationalized inside your organization. So the structure is intentional. We will start with the problem, then define the target state, then move into governance, operations, measurement, and finally into practical action. The threat reality and the importance of this slide, it shows one of the core reasons why compliance alone is not enough, because the organization and the attacker do not operate on the same clock. And this is a very important factor for this team, because many organizations run assurance on a slow rhythm. Certification audits are often annual. Risk reviews can be quarterly. Patch cycles may be monthly. And internal reviews may happen according to certain fixed calendars. But attackers, on the other hand, they do operate differently, because a vulnerability can be weaponized within days, if not hours. Stolen credentials can be solved very quickly. Initial access can also move to privilege escalation, to lateral movement, and encryption as well in a couple of hours. So the attacker does not truly wait for the next audit cycle that you might have pre-planned inside your organization. And this creates a structural gap. Compliance and assurance often sample reality at specific moments, but cyber risk changes continuously. And this is also why modern regulatory trends are shifting, whether we talk European context like DORA and NIS2, operational resilience expectations, or also incident reporting requirements. The question is increasingly moving from do you have controls to can you withstand disruption and recover quickly? So the main message here is this: annual assurance is not enough to manage a threat environment that moves daily or hourly. Since compliance tells you what was true when evidence what was collected, resilience needs to tell you how the organization performs when the reality changes. So one of the most important slides in this deck is this: why do compliant organizations still fail? I'm sure that the majority of our colleagues and participants here today are typically asking the same question. And the reason is really simple, because the reason compliant organizations fail is usually not that they have zero controls. InfoSec at the end of the day is not only about security controls. In many cases, the controls exist, and they do exist, whether it's technical controls, managerial, administrative, legal, or whatsoever. The problem is that the controls are not operationalized, they are not owned, tested, and sometimes connected. First, we have policies without operations. A policy may be approved, it may be signed, it may be stored, but it may not influence daily behavior. So if people do not know it, do not follow it, or use it during the decisions, it is not operational. You only have a piece of paper which is not technically a security policy. Second thing, and clear accountability. And this is usually the problem where I have seen personally in every single mission I have operated on, whether it's Algerian context, African, Middle Eastern, European, or technically worldwide. A control might have an owner in a spreadsheet, but during an incident, no one knows who has the authority to isolate the system, to notify a regulator, to communicate to customers, or to accept residual risk. Third thing is controls. Controls are never tested technically. Many controls are implemented once and evidenced annually, but nobody knows how they perform under pressure. And this is one of the problems that we see nowadays in modern organizations as well. Fourth thing is incident response plans, or what we call ERPs. They are not exercised. And this is the worst moment to test an incident response plan for the first time, is during the real incident. And this is why we will talk later about the ISO 27035, where it talks about the importance of the planification and the preparation of these things at early stages. Big thing are alerts, alerts without decisions. Usually stock teams may generate alerts and tickets, but if those alerts do not trigger escalation, risk updates, business decisions, or even corrective actions, then obviously the organization is not resilient. They only have monitoring, but with no prevention and proactive capabilities at the end of the day. And then sixth thing is static evidence versus dynamic threats. And this is really a problem. Compliance evidence ages, but threats evolve, like we just mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So if assurance does not really connect to continuous monitoring and improvement, then the organization becomes blind between reviews. And the key sentence here is very simple at the end of the day, after all of these 6 factors or 6 things. The audit sees the artifact, but the incident tests the capability. And this is principally the difference between these two teams, the team who does the GRC work and the team that does the SecOps work. So the comparison is central to the whole session. A compliance mindset asks, can we pass the audit? But a resilience mindset asks, can we sustain critical services under attack? So compliance is often periodic. It is deadline driven. It focuses on evidences, documents, attestations, and snapshots, or records in general. Ownership is often pushed toward the compliance or security team. But resilience is continuous. It is threat driven and business driven. It focuses on exercise results, response outcomes, telemetry, recovery tests, and decision making, most importantly, under pressure. So ownership cannot stay only with security. It must include business owners, executives, IT, legal, communications, risk, operations, and so on. The difference is especially visible in leadership. In a compliance model, leadership may approve the policy and receive a report. In a resilience model, leadership participates in crisis exercises, understands decision rights, accepts residual risk firmly, and is accountable for recovery, most importantly. But I want to be clear about this. This is not compliance versus resilience as enemies, ladies and gentlemen. Compliance is necessary. It creates the foundation, but resilience is what proves that the foundation supports real operational performance. So let's imagine it like this. Compliance is the floor. Resilience is, let's say, the operating capability built on top of that floor. And this is how they do interconnect between each of them. So operational fragility, like we are saying, has a cost, and that cost increases with time. A cyber incident is not only a technical event. At the beginning, yes, probably it may be an operational issue, but after certain hours, it becomes a business issue. After a day or two, it becomes even a board level issue. So if it continues, it can become also regulatory, reputational, financial, and a market issue. And this is something extremely important for businesses nowadays. So every hour of confusion will increase the impact. Service downtime creates lost revenue, operational backlog, SLA penalties, customer dissatisfaction, and so on. Recovery, on the other hand, becomes also more expensive when the organization has not rehearsed restoration. So emergency recovery, on the other hand, as well, under pressure, is always more costly than prepared recovery. And you can see so many use cases on the internet about organizations who face cyber attacks and cyber incidents. So regulatory exposure, on the other hand, also increases because many organizations do have obligations in terms of strict reporting windows. And the organization may still be investigating while legal and regulatory clocks are already ticking and running. Trust erosion is also critical since many stakeholders understand what incidents can happen and that they can happen. What they judge very harshly is poor response, unclear communication, slow recovery, and also lack of control. So the key idea is fragility is not only a cyber weakness, it's also a cost structure. So organizations will either invest in resilience before the incident or they pay the premium during the incident. And this is one of the decisions that top managers and executives do need to take as a decision nowadays. Cyber resilience is not just prevention. It's not only cyber controls. It's the ability to anticipate, withstand, respond to, recover from, adapt to, and improve after adverse cyber events while keeping critical business services running, as the definition says worldwide. So the phrase critical business services is essential. Cyber resilience is not only measured only by whether the firewall works or whether the SIEM generates alerts. It's measured by whether the organization can continue delivering what matters most inside of their context. So the life cycle starts before the incident. Anticipate means understanding threats, scenarios, critical assets, dependencies, and likely attack paths. Protect means implementing proportionate controls based on real risk levels. Detect means having visibility where it matters most, especially around crown jewels and critical services. Respond, on the other hand, means having rehearsed roles, escalation paths, playbooks, and decision making at the end of the day. Recover, on the other hand, means restoring those critical services in the right order and within agreed recovery objectives. And you name it, LTOs, RPOs, and so on. And also, the adaptation phase means changing architecture, changing processes, controls, and also priorities based on what was learned from the lessons. And finally, improve, which is continuous improvement, which means institutionalizing lessons so the same weakness does not remain open and does not happen again. And this is the resilience. It assumes that compromise is possible, and it is, and prepares the organization to continue functioning despite it. And this leads us to the anatomy of cyber resilience, since it is built through multiple layers. Usually the first layer is direct. Governance, risk management, executive accountability. So this layer decides, I'm sorry, apparently I did hit the button by mistake. There it goes. Like I was saying, this layer decides what matters, who owns it, and what level of risk is acceptable. The second layer, which is build, architecture, controls, assets, and so on, because you cannot protect what you do not understand, and what you cannot recover what you have not mapped. Where the majority of CISOs usually say, I have a visibility problem. And this is the reason why visibility issues do happen in the first place. It comes down to asset management. Then the third layer, which is operate, whether it is a SOC, a CSIRT, or you name it. Vulnerability management, OPSEC, SecOps, and so on. The fourth layer, which is sustain, so business continuity, disaster recovery, and crisis management. And finally, the fifth layer is prove, whether it is testing, assessments, exercises, metrics, and overall assurance. Most organizations have these layers, but they are often disconnected. And governance is in one room, SOC is on the other room, business continuity is also somewhere else, and crisis communication is elsewhere, and risk management in a separate reporting cycle. So resilience happens when these layers operate as a one system. And the common failure pattern is strong build and weak prove. Usually, organizations invest heavily in tools and controls, but they do not invest enough in validating whether those controls work together under stress. So cyber resilience starts with governance because incidents are full of decisions. Who can isolate a system? Who can shut down a business service? Who informs the regulator? Who approves external communication? Who can accept residual risk and so on and so on? And if those answers are unclear, then the organization will obviously lose time. And time can either be your enemy or your friend during a crisis. Executive sponsorship is necessary because cyber resilience cannot be delegated completely to IT or security. Security teams can advise, can coordinate, detect, respond, and recommend. But many resilience decisions are business decisions. And named accountability is a very essential aspect. So every critical service should have an accountable owner, and every important control or control domain should have an owner as well. Every major incident role should have a person and not only a department. So decision rights must be defined before the incident. And in a crisis, organizations do not fail only because they lack technical skill. They often fail because no one knows who has authority over what. So my practical field test is this. If no one can name who decides shutdown at 2 a.m., your governance only exists on paper. Because governance is not measured by the thickness of policies, it's technically measured by the decision latency during a crisis. And this is extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, which will bring us to this slide where it translates governance into a practical decision matrix. Because in a major incident, certain decisions cannot be improvised. Isolating a revenue generating system is not purely technical. It may stop the attack, but it may also disrupt business. And the incident commander may lead the decision, but the server or the service owner must be involved. Ransom stems, on the other hand, and negotiation posture are not decisions that you can invent during a ransomware. So the organization should have a pre-agreed position involving the CEO, the board legal counsel, the insurer, and other relevant executives and interested parties. Regulator notification must be handled by legal and security together based on verified facts and statutory timelines, depending on the specific context of your organization and your country. Public and customer communication must also involve certain communications leadership, legal review, and executive approval, most likely, because silence can also damage trust in a business world nowadays. Invoking business continuity must happen according to the threshold, not only emotions. If recovery exceeds the agreed tolerance, then the continuity process must activate. So accepting residual risk to restore early must be formally owned by the business. And security should advise, but the business owner needs to accept or to manage or to decide on what we do in terms of a certain risk scenario. So the principle is simple. One decision, one accountable owner, and one time budget. An undecided decision is still a decision, and it's usually the worst one. And now comes risk management, since it becomes valuable when it changes operational priorities, because the first step is usually identifying the critical business services, not just servers, applications, or databases, but services the business cannot afford to lose. The second step is mapping cron rules and dependencies behind those services. As an example, which assets support them, which data matters, which third parties are involved, which identities, networks, apps, backups, and infrastructures are critical. The third step is prioritizing using threat intel. Risk cannot be managed only through generic likelihood and impact scoring. Organizations should ask what threats are actively targeting our sector, our technology, our geography, our business model, or overall our context. And this is where CTI and threat modeling comes in place. The fourth step is scenario-based risk thinking. A scenario as an example, such as ransomware affects our ERP during quarter law, is much more useful than a generic line in a risk register. The fifth step is treating risk based on business impact. And here we have the ISO 27005, which can support the method, but the outcome must influence real decisions. So the anti-pattern is a risk register created for the auditor, but disconnected from SOC monitoring, patching, vulnerability management, continuity planning, and budgets. And the target state is that risk decisions change what operations defend first, monitor hardest, and recover fastest. So frameworks are useful, absolutely. And I want to be very clear about that. 27001 gives a management system structure. 27002 gives you a certain baseline in terms of control reference. The fifth edition supports risk management. The 35 supports incident management as a whole. And the 22301 supports business continuity. You have also NIST CSF, which gives a functional model, and we can have a whole long list in terms of CES, OWASP, CSA, and other organizations and frameworks. But frameworks do not automatically create speed, judgment, coordination, or muscle memory. A standard can tell you what should exist. It does not guarantee that people can act under pressure. So the operationalization chain is the important part. A requirement must become a policy that the business understands. And a policy must become a process with named owners. And the process must become controls embedded in daily work. And these controls must be monitored for drift. Monitoring must lead to exercises that prove performance. And exercises must create improvements. So many organizations stop halfway and they move from requirement to policy to documentation, but they do not complete the chain toward monitoring, testing, response, and improvement. And the standard is the map, but capability is the territory. And this is how we do connect between these two disconnected worlds usually nowadays between SecOps and GRC. So this is one of the most important also practical models in the presentation. So most organizations start with a framework and a control catalog. And this is normal. But the question is, how do we move from controls to capability? Step one is the framework. We do not need to recreate the wheels, obviously. So we need to select and scope based on the business context, whether it's ISO, it's PCI DSS, SOC 2, you name it. Step two is control. We need to design the controls proportionate to the real risk based on our specific context. Step three is process. Embed those controls into workflows that people can actually use. Step four is ownership. It defines who runs the control and who is accountable for it. Because many programs stop there. They have selected, designed, documented, and assigned controls, but resilience is built in the next four steps. Step five, monitoring. Measuring control performance and detecting drift continuously. Step six is testing, exercising controls, teams, and decisions under stress. Seven is response, acting on findings, on incidents, on alerts, and failures in real time. And eight, which is improvement. So feeding these lessons back into design, risk, governance, and operations. This is a very simple model, but believe me, it is a very powerful one if you can operationalize it inside your organization. So if an organization wants to know whether it has a compliance program or a resilience program, it should ask this simple question. Are we funding only the first four steps, or are we also investing in the last four? And this is the differentiating point. So this one will help you think honestly about evidence. For any important control, ask what is the highest level of evidence we really have? Wrong one is declared. Someone says the control exists, and this is weak evidence. Rank two is documented. So a policy or a procedure, it exists and it is approved. And this is better, but still not proof of operational performance. Rank three, implemented. The control was observed operating at a specific point in time. And rank four is tested. The control was tested under realistic conditions, and we know how it performs. And finally, rank five, which is proven, the control has performed under real stress or repeated realistic exercises. So the key issue is that many audits and reviews provide comfort around ranks two and three, while incidents test organizations at rank five. And this is why a control can pass an audit and fail during a real world incident. So a practical exercise for any organization is to take the top 10 controls protecting crown jewels and place them honestly on this ladder. Controls sitting at rank 2 are not necessarily useless, but they are unproven. And the highest risk statement is we have that control. But the better question is how do we know that it works under pressure? So a real incident is like an unscheduled audit with no preparation time, no limited scope, and no corrective action period. It tests what the organization really is, not what the documentation says. It tests speed, how quickly can the organization detect, validate, escalate, contain, and recover. It tests also coordination. Can security, IT, legal, communications, business owners, executives, and third parties move all together? It tests also decision making. Who can authorize isolation? Who can disclose? And who can accept risk? It also tests visibility. Does the organization know what is affected, what depends on it, what data might be impacted, and what systems are critical? It also tests communication. Can the organization communicate internally, externally, legally, and with the regulators accurately and on time? It also tests recovery. Do backups restore in the right order, within the required time? It tests also leadership maturity. Does leadership remain calm, informed, decisive, or does it create confusion? None of these are fully visible in a document review. All of them appear in the first hour of a serious real world incident. This is an extremely practical one. So spend some time with me here. The first hour of a major incident determines the trajectory of the whole event. At T plus 5 minutes, the alert must be validated and severity must be called based on thresholds, not debates. If severity depends on opinion, the organization already lost time. At T10, the incident commander must be named and the war room must be open. There should be one channel, one source of truth, and one operational rhythm. At T20 minutes, containment should already be executing according to pre-authorized playbooks, pre-authorized and pre-tested playbooks. So if the team needs to search for permission while the attacker is moving, your playbook is not mature enough. At T30, executives should receive a structured brief. What we know, what we do not know, what are we doing, and what decisions are needed, and by when. And then T45 minutes, legal and compliance teams should be assessing notification obligations. Regulatory clocks do not wait until the organization feels comfortable. At T60, the operational rhythm must be set. Next update, next decision point, next containment step, and next communication step. So the key point after all of this, nothing on this timeline should be improvised. Every single step of it exists because it was rehearsed before. So a resilient SOC and CSIRT capability is not just about tools, it's about connected handles. The first group is C and SOC. Detection must cover crown jewels, critical services, not only generic logs. Triage must classify severity based on business impact, not only technical severity or a CVSS as an example. Escalation must trigger decision makers according to clear thresholds. And the second group is act and contain. Containment requires pre-authorized actions. If every isolation decision requires a meeting, then containment will be late. Coordination requires one incident commander, one channel, and one source of truth. And finally, forensics must preserve evidence with its chain of custody and so on in a way that supports root cause analysis, legal reviews, insurance, regulatory obligations, and also the court of law. The third and final group, which is close and learn. Communication must happen on rhythm, not randomly. So lessons learned must feed risk management, control improvement, architecture, training, and governance. The important message is that maturity lives in the handoffs. Detection to triage, triage to escalation, escalation to decision, and decision to containment, and then containment to recovery, and finally recovery to lessons learned. So tools can support the boxes, but only rehearsals strengthens the handoffs in the real world. So this is one of your strongest and most important slides, ladies and gentlemen. In many organizations, GRC and security operations are disconnected, like we said and like we have seen. So GRC works with governance, risk registers, control frameworks, compliance reporting, audits, and board reports. And operations works with SOC monitoring, CSIRT response, vulnerabilities, incidents, alerts, and corrective actions. Both sides may be doing good work, but if they are not connected, the organization remains blind. So the GRC layer should send priorities downward, what matters most, what the risk appetite is, what controls are critical, and what services are essential, and finally, what risk decisions have been made. On the other hand, the operations layer should send truth upward. Which controls are failing, which assets are attacked, which vulnerabilities are exploited, which incidents repeat, and which corrective actions are not closed. The loop is what matters here. A stock finding should be able to change a risk rating. A repeated incident should influence control priorities. And a failed restoration test should reach leadership. And an emerging threat should definitely reprioritize budget investments. So the litmus test is very simple. When did a stock finding last change a risk rating, reprioritize a control, or reach the board? If the answer is never, then GRC and operations are not integrated and they are unfortunately parallel systems, which does not benefit an organization at all. So containing the attacker is not the same as keeping the business alive. Incident response focuses on detecting, containing, eradicating, investing, and preserving evidence. Its key question is the threat neutralized? Business continuity and disaster recovery focus on keeping critical services available or restoring them according to business priorities. And usually their key question is which service must come back first and within what time? On the other hand, we also have crisis management, which focuses on executive decisions, communication, legal exposure, reputation, stakeholder management, and so on. And usually its key question is who is deciding and who needs to be informed? And a common mistake here is that treating incident response as the whole resilience process. It is not. You can contain the attacker and still fail the business if services are not restored. You can restore systems and still fail trust if communication is poor. You can have a business continuity plan and still fail it if it has never been exercised with your CSIRT. So the real maturity is in the handoffs between incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, and crisis management. A strong CSIRT and a documented BCP are not enough if they have never been tested all together inside one system. So testing is where organizations discover whether they have capability or only documentation. A tabletop exercise proves decision-making, roles, escalation, and executive readiness. It should include leadership, not only technical teams. So a technical simulation as well proves detection and containment against realistic adversary behavior. An incident drill proves the end-to-end response process, including timing and tool usage. A restoration test proves whether backups restore in the right order within recovery objectives. A communications exercise proves whether the organization can manage internal messages, customer statements, regulator notifications, and executive updates. A third-party dependency test also proves what happens when a critical supplier in your supply chain, cloud service, SaaS platform, or managed provider fails. So the key point is that different exercises prove different things. A tabletop does not prove backup restoration, and a restoration test does not prove executive decision making. A technical simulation does not prove public communication, and organizations often avoid testing because it exposes uncomfortable truths. But that is exactly why it is valuable. An exercise that finds no issues may be poorly designed. Real testing should reveal gaps early when they are cheaper and more safer to fix before it's too late. So testing obviously should not be random. It should be a structured annual program. As an example, in Q1, we run an executive tabletop, and this tests leadership, decision rights, escalation, communication, and crisis behavior. In Q2, we run a technical simulation, and this tests detection and containment against relevant threat scenarios that are relevant to our organizational context. In Q3, we run a joint ER, business continuity, and crisis management drill. And this is critical because most organizations fail at handoffs, not inside isolated teams. In Q4, we run restoration and communications exercises. And this validates recovery windows and notification readouts. So the design principles matter. Scenarios must be threat informed. Do not create fantasy exercises that are disconnected from the reality and real adversary behavior. Difficulty should increase year after year because repeating the same easy scenario creates comfort and not capability. Objectives must be clear. Each exercise should test specific decisions, controls, handoffs, or recovery capabilities. Third parties, on the other hand, should be included because real incidents often involve suppliers, cloud platforms, managed services, or outsourced operations. And most importantly, findings must enter a corrective action pipeline and be tracked to closure. So an exercise whose findings die in a report is theater with extra steps. So this one will summarize patterns that you will see repeatedly in real organizations. Compliance theater means evidence is produced for auditors but not used by operations. Orphan ownership means many people are involved, but no one is accountable when it matters. A disconnected risk register means risk ratings exist, but they do not influence stock priorities, patching, architecture, budget, or even continuity. Untested response plans mean the first full execution happens during the actual incident, and weak escalation means teams debate severity while the blast radius grows. Tool heavy, process light means the organization bought platforms but did not define workflows, ownership, escalation, and very simple decision logic. Siloed coordination means security, IT, legal, comms, and business teams meet properly for the first time during the crisis. But lessons never learned means post-incident actions are logged but not closed. Repeated incidents will continue and the organization does not get any stronger. So every one of you should reflect here. Most organizations have at least a few of these patterns. So the value today is not to blame the organization, but the value lies in identifying where resilience breaks first. And this takes us to the maturity curve that helps organizations locate themselves honestly. Stage one is documented. So policies and plans exist, but nothing is verified in practice. Stage two, it is implemented, so controls are deployed and running, but performance is unknown. We have no idea about their effectiveness. And then comes stage three, which is measured. So metrics and testing show what works and what does not. Stage four, integrated. GRC, SOC, CSIRT, business continuity, and so on. They are all one connected system. And stage five, which is the optimal level, adaptive, every incident, exercise, threat shift, and audit insight makes the organization even stronger. Many certified organizations are between, let's say, stages two, sometimes three, and so on. But they believe, unfortunately, that they are at stage four. And that is not because certification is bad. It's because certification alone does not automatically prove integration or adaptability. The hardest transition is often more from measured to integrated because measuring is technical and procedural, while integration is organizational and cultural. So the main aspect here is the human or the people level. So to become resilient, the organization must move from documentation and implementation toward measurement, integration, and adaptation. Compliance reporting often says something like, oh, we are 90% or I don't know, like 92% compliant. And that may be useful, but it does not tell us how the organization will perform in an incident. Resilience indicators are different. Speed indicators include mean time to detect, mean time to respond, and mean time to recover critical services. Coverage indicators include the percentage of critical processes with tested response and recovery plans, and the level of asset and dependency visibility. Practice indicators do include exercise frequency, realism, restoration success rate, and control assurance quality. Learning indicators include closure of lessons, lessons learned, obviously, executive participation in exercises, and incident trend intel, and cross-functional coordination. So the word tested is very important here. A process with a plan is not the same as a process with a tested plan. If an organization wants to start simple, I recommend very simple three indicators. Time to recover critical services, the percentage of critical processes with tested plans, and the lessons learned closed on time. Compliance status tells where you stand, and the resilience indicators that we talked about will tell you how you may perform. So this one here shows what resilience reporting can look like in practice. The goal is to create a board readable view that does not drown leadership in technical details, because that's not the goal. Mean time to detect shows speed of visibility. Tested recovery plans show whether critical services are covered by validated recovery capability. Restoration tests show whether recovery is real. A failed restoration test is not necessarily bad news, it is a lesson found early. So finding failure during a test is much more better than discovering it during ransomware recovery, as an example. The lessons closed on time do show whether the organization actually improves. And the chart shows time to recover a critical service improvising over time. And this is what leadership should care about: direction of travel. The scorecard should sit beside the compliance report. It should not replace it. Compliance says, do we conform? Resilience scorecards can say, do we perform? This distinction is powerful for executives because it translates cybersecurity into operational day-to-day performance. So this one should, I hope you will remember it by the end of the session. Like, who owns resilience by name, not by department? Which critical services can we not afford to lose and for how long? What exactly happens in the first hour of a major incident? When did we last test recovery and did it meet the promised window? How do stock findings change risk decisions and spending as well? Are we measuring resilience or only reporting compliance status? Can leadership make informed decisions under crisis conditions? And have we rehearsed it before? These questions are very simple, but they do expose deep gaps very quickly. If leadership cannot answer them clearly, the organization has a resilience gap for real. This is also a practical diagnostic. For any CISO present with us here, risk manager, auditor, consultant, or an executive, they can take these questions and run like a short leadership workshop, because these answers will reveal whether the organization has operational capability or just certain documentation. So this one will bring the summary of our session all together. The governance layer produces decisions. It defines accountability, decision rights, risk appetite, and crisis leadership. The risk and assurance layer produces priorities. It identifies critical services, chrome jewels, scenarios, control assurance results, and audit insights. And the operational security layer produces detection and action. It includes SOC, CSIRT, threat intel, vulnerability management, exposure management, monitoring, and most importantly, response. And then the response and the recovery layer produces recovery. It includes incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management, and most importantly, service restoration. But the model only works if there is a loop. Exercises, incidents, metrics, and operational findings must move upward. Governance must transform those findings into decisions, budgets, priorities, and improvements. So without the loop, this is only an organizational chart. With the loop, it becomes a real operating model. So most organizations already have some sort of these layers. So the work is not always to create everything from zero. The real work that you need to do is to connect them all together. This is a simplified roadmap which gives organizations a practical path. Phase one, day 0 to 30, baseline and assess. Identify your critical services, your dependencies, response reality, and gaps. Focus on reality, not on the documentation. Phase two, from 30 to 60 days, clarify governance, name owners, define decision rights, define escalation thresholds, and agree recovery priorities with the business. Phase three, usually from 60 to 90 days, strengthen operations, close detection gaps around crown jewels, build containment playbooks, and connect SOC findings to risk decisions. Phase four, which can be done on a quarter basis, exercise and validate. Run tabletops, run your technical drills, your restoration tests, and crisis exercises. Track every single finding. And finally, phase five, which is continuous. So the measurement and the improvement. Report resilience indicators, close lessons learned, and reassess maturity and keep on improving. The important thing here is that moving beyond compliance does not always require a huge transformation at the beginning. The first 60 days are mostly about clarity, accountability, priorities, and decision rights. And these are the high value improvements. You cannot buy resilience only with buying tools, but you have to build it with governance, with operations, with testing, and improvement at all three layers, whether it's people, processes, or also technologies. So this is probably the most practical slide in the deck. Some actions can start immediately and technically cost nothing. This week, go ahead, name the incident commander and 2 deputies in writing. Do not wait for a major incident to decide who leads. Verify the in-call list. Many organizations discover during incidents that numbers are outdated, people have changed roles, or escalation chains do not work. Agree the top 5 critical services with the business. This creates focus. Draft 3 severity thresholds that automatically trigger executive escalation. Do not let escalation depend on debate. This month, run 1 2-hour tabletop exercises with executives. It does not need to be perfect. It just has to start. Restore 1 crown jewel system from backup and time it. This gives real evidence. Put 1 SOC finding on the risk committee agenda and record the decision. This starts connecting GRC and SecOps. And then schedule the lessons learned review before the exercise runs. No findings do not, so findings in these exercises do not disappear just afterwards. And no project, no new tool, no big budget, just decisions and discipline. That's all you need in order to improve your cyber resiliency level inside of your organization. So this is a scenario. It makes this whole session interconnected between each other. So imagine an organization with a certified ISMS and past audits. On paper, it looks very mature. Then ransomware hits on a Friday evening. 20 minutes in, the SOC detects encryption activity, but severity is debated because no threshold exists. 2 hours in, roles are unclear. Incident response plan names departments, not people, and the on-call list is stale. 6 hours in, isolation requires approval. Approval requires a meeting, and while people are coordinating the meeting, encryption spreads. By day 2, restoration is painful because recovery was not tested. Customer communication and regulator communication are improvised. Now compare this with a resilient organization. And this is one of the examples that happened to me personally when I was leading a certain incident response team with one of my former clients. So imagine all of this now and compare it with a resilient organization. Severity thresholds automatically summon the incident commander. Named rules have been rehearsed. Containment actions are pre-authorized. Backups are immutable and tested. Restoration follows a very simple and rehearsed business priority order. And communication templates are also ready. The attack may still happen, but the outcome is most definitely and most likely different. So same controls on paper, but different ownership, rehearsal, and decision speed. And this is your key factors to keep in your head by the end of this session. So some key takeaways. I know I speak a lot, so I'm trying to summarize this whole thing. Compliance is a foundation, not the finish line. Organizations should continue using standards, audits, and frameworks, but they should not confuse them with rhythms. Second thing is that resilience is operational. It lives in decisions, handoffs, recovery tests, escalation paths, and daily behavior. Third takeaway is that governance and named accountability come first. During a crisis, ambiguity creates delay. Fourth point is that GRC and SecOps must run as one loop. Risk priorities should give operations, and operational truth should update risk decisions. Fifth thing, testing is non-negotiable, whether it is assessments, tests, audits, and so on, because untested capability is only a hypothesis. Sixth thing is that resilience compounds through continuous improvement. Every incident, exercise, failed test, and audit finding should make the organization even stronger because compliance is the foundation at the end of the day, but resilience is the real building. So testing is how we know that our building can withstand. So before moving to our questions and answers part, I want to leave everyone with a few reflection questions to ask yourself. Where would your organization break first? Would decisions be made in the first hour or would meetings be scheduled? Which capability that you currently call tested is actually only documented? Whose name is on resilience today before the incident? These questions are intentionally direct because resilience is not built by optimistic assumptions, it is built by honest diagnosis. This is also the moment to transition all of this into our discussion. So please think about your own organization, not theoretically, but practically. Like, if a major incident happened tonight, where would the first delay appear? Whether it's governance, escalation, recovery, communication, because that is where your resilience work should begin. So with that, I would be very happy to finally go ahead and take your questions. So thank you so much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. We now have around, well, we consumed already so much time, so we have around 10 minutes to answer the questions. So feel free to ask whether it's governance, framework, CSIRT, or whatever. I see a question from Mustafa Hassan. The question says that what are the most common gaps you see between documented cyber policies and actual operational practices? Well, this is one of the points that I mentioned during my talk. Unfortunately, one of the main problems that we still see nowadays are governance problems, and they are not documentation problems because the majority of organizations do have certain maturity level that let it have predefined documented information. But unfortunately, roles and responsibilities are still unclear in so many scenarios. Like, who has the authority to do such things? What is the workflow? What is the escalation path? And these things are more important in certain scenarios more than the policy itself. So I think that the common gap is the definition of roles and responsibilities alongside their authorities as well. Another question from Radi Al Hussein, how can organizations balance compliance priorities with real world cyber risk and business objectives? Well, I have a very simple question, a very simple answer, sorry, since I do receive pretty much the same question in almost all of my webinars, training sessions, and so on. It is simple. Choose one standard that can let you build a management system. Ideally, it is the ISMS, the ISO 27001. And at the same time, work on your operational capabilities, whether it is defensive or offensive. So whether it is integrating a SOC and a CSIRT, and whether it is offensive in terms of conducting all of these testing and simulations, pen testing, adversary simulations, and all of the other security assessments. With these two, you can arrive at a certain moment where you will have compliant posture, but at the same time with certain resilient capabilities. Hold on, I see so many questions. That's so good. Jihan Sami, can multiple cyber security and compliance frameworks be combined into one resilience-focused operating model? This is a very, very good question because, like I said, after we finish, you have these 4 slides, framework mapping across the resilience lifecycle, the resilience readiness checklist that I prepared, the sample board level resilience matrix, and maturity self-assessment questions. These are like introductory 4 slides that you can begin your work with. They are not the end of the day because you still have so much to do, but at least take these as a baseline. After we finish this session, I will share the presentation where you can find all of these that can be combined exactly like you asked as one resilience-focused operating model. Another question from Radi. He said, what is one common cyber practice that appears effective on paper but often fails during the real incident? Oh, this is a good one. This needs so much thinking from my end. I'm gonna go back to you in a couple of minutes. Neriman as well, thank you Amy, for the webinar. Happy to meet you again. My question is, thank you so much, and I'm pleased to have you again with us here today. Do you think that the red team is an obligation nowadays for organizations? Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Yes, it is, because if you have followed the slides and the content like one by one, you noticed me that I talked about the disconnect between SecOps and GRC, and then how do they interconnect? And then in order to switch that to a resilient capability, we need to do what we call testing. And one of the most important aspects in testing is red teaming, which is based on a red team. So obviously, yes, red teaming or red team simulations as a whole in general, they do test the detection and capabilities inside an organization. And this is one of the most important factors when we talk about cyber resiliency. So absolutely, yes, it is very, very important for an organization to have one nowadays. And it is obligatory for certain contexts in Europe, in the United States, and so on. Nihal, what governance structure works best when cyber risk, continuity, and crisis management report to different leaders? Well, your question is similar to the question of Radi, which is what is one common cyber practice that appears effective on paper but often fails during a real incident. This requires more thoughts and a context establishment. So I would suggest you that if you want a practical answer adapted to your context, that we get in touch later so we can answer it in details. It is not sufficient to answer it just briefly, just like that. To both of you, Radi and Nihal. Another question from Nariman, how many times should the organization do technical audit for the most critical assets? Well, if we talk about technical assessments, I would say that after every single major change, we should do a technical assessment. This is like very logical. Standards and frameworks do not require a certain time frame. They only require you to have a pre-established planning and timeline when it comes to assessment and audits. But If you are operating in a highly regulated environment, obviously you need to do these technical tests and assessments more often. What are the frameworks that we should refer to? Nariman, your question is also kind of similar to other questions because this requires more context establishment. I cannot answer you directly, but I can give you a general one. You can check OWASP frameworks and checklists as an example, and NIST as well, since they do have predefined technical test frameworks or guidelines that you can follow. I think we're right to the end of the Q&A, unless you guys do have other questions. So thank you so much, every single one of you, for your time, your attention, and your questions. A special thank you also to Noran and the iExperts team for the invitation and for organizing this session. If there is only one message that I want you to keep, it's this. Do not stop at documented compliance, build the capability, always test it, improve it, and always try to prove that it works. I would be happy to continue this conversation or on LinkedIn. You can also find more of my work through my website or through the podcast of the InfoSec Control Room. If you have any other question by the end of this webinar, you can always reach out to me in LinkedIn or on my website. I would be happy to provide you with any help or assistance. Thank you again, everyone, for your time, and I will be looking forward to the next one, inshallah. Thank you so much.